All right, y'all. I I wasn't sure if I was gonna make a video about this. Wasn't sure if I was going to directly address this story, but after deliberating on it for a little bit here, I've decided I want to talk about it for at least one video because it's it's pretty big, right? It feels a little manipulative. It feels a little dirty, but I can't deny that this is a pretty big bomb that Brady Henderson dropped a couple days ago. So, since it's a couple days old, you guys have probably seen this. And initially, I was thinking to myself, I don't want to get involved in all this. But then Wilson actually chimed in about it a little bit yesterday. And then I was like, okay, if this is going to be the way it is leading to this Monday Night Football game, then let's lean into it a little bit and let's try to be balanced here. Let's address this story. Let's address these comments. Let's address the things that are said here in a balanced and fair way. Let's do our best to do that here. So basically, short version, long story short, Brady Henderson released this article on ESPN a couple days ago discussing some of the finer points of the friction between Russell Wilson and the Seattle Seahawks that led to the trade that we made a few months ago. So it basically outlines how the relationship deteriorated. And I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that happened over the last several years that are not in this story, that won't be in any story for years and years. Like, there could be a very interesting 30 for 30 documentary on this stuff down the line. There could be a very interesting book or two written. But for now, this is what we have. I mean, Wilson's still playing in the league, and Carroll's still coaching. Schneider's still managing. So they're not going to want to say everything anyway. But I want to talk about a few things in this story. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's pretty long. If you haven't already read it, then maybe you should go read it. It's interesting. It just kind of provides a little bit of a timeline of how we got here, some of the key events, and then you have Wilson kind of commenting on some of the events as described in the article yesterday. So I just want to talk about a few things that I want to highlight here. Not all of it directly related to Russell Wilson, by the way. There's a few things in here that intrigue me from other angles. So let's start with 2017, I guess it would be. So, according to this article, the drama really started. It's actually later in the article, closer to the midpoint of the article. The first highlight here is after the 2016 season, apparently, John Schneider was enamored with Pat Mahomes. He attended his pro day, and it is believed that Seattle wanted to draft him if he was still available. If he had gotten past Kansas City and a few other teams and been there in the 20s, which at the time was considered very possible because Pat Mahomes was considered a bit of a project, we would have taken Mahomes. And this was not the last time that the Seahawks would do something similar. The very next year, the spring of 2018, Schneider did the same thing with Josh Allen. And not only did he attend Josh Allen's pro day and apparently really like him, there was even a report that the Seahawks discussed, like seriously discussed, a trade that would send Russell Wilson to Cleveland for the number one overall pick, which they would then use on Josh Allen. So here's the kind of interesting thing. So, spring of 2017. So, after the 2016 season. 2016, Wilson had just finished his fifth year in the NFL. He was 28 going on 29. 2016 was not his best year. He was playing with one leg for a good chunk of the season. It took a big step back from 2015, right? Like, his completion percentage fell 3.5 points. His ability to run was crippled. touchdowns way down, interceptions up a little bit, just not nearly as good of a season. But I it just really surprises me that this team was considering moving on from Wilson at that point. Not after 10 years when he's old, when his skills look like they're declining, when there are clearly issues with Wilson on the field that look like they're going to limit his ability to be an elite quarterback going forward. Like now, it's defensible. But coming off of 2016, he was 1 year removed from looking like the greatest quarterback ever in 2015, the second half of the season, ran himself into the MVP race after a pretty bad start. And then 2016, he played through a pretty nasty leg injury, and you're already looking to move on from him? And then you do it again after 2017, where I wasn't a big fan of the way he played, but he did lead the league in touchdowns. He did provide almost all of our offense, and you thought about it? So, I don't know, man. That really surprises me. If that's true, and I do kind of believe it's true because we've heard it from a lot of sources, then Wilson signed his extension after 2014. And that extension was going to run through theoretically 2019, but it was understood that he was going to want to renegotiate after 2018 because nobody wants to play on the last year of their contract. There must have been, part of it had to be, there must have been an intense desire to not pay a quarterback massive amounts of money. The second Wilson contract was pretty reasonable. It was like 4 years, 80 million, 20 mil per. Sure, you can do that, but it still hurts your team a little bit when you have to do that. And they must have been looking at the tea leaves and realized this next contract is not going to be 20. It's going to be 30, 32, 34. I think it ended up being, 35? So they must have been looking at that and just went, we need to avoid that at all costs. Let's try to give ourselves an opportunity to avoid it. And ultimately, they couldn't quite do it. Maybe the offer wasn't out there. Maybe the right player wasn't out there, and eventually they just were in a situation where they just went, well, okay, fine. We'll give him the monster contract. But the fact that we were thinking about moving on from Wilson as early as 2017, the Pat Mahomes draft, it's hard for me to believe it was anything wrong with Wilson at that point. Now, yeah, Wilson last year, I don't think he played very well. Wilson, the second half of the year before, I don't think he played that well. I understand it now. It's hard for me to believe there was anything going on the field with Wilson coming off of 2016 that made you feel like we got to move on from this guy. Second of all, let me just say this. If the story is true, then Schneider knows how to pick them. Pat Mahomes and Josh Allen, two top flight quarterbacks, elite of the elite of the elite. I mean, if it's true, then credit to him because he got the right guys, if it's true. And we know that there have been stories that we wanted Baker Mayfield and we were going to trade Wilson for the number 1 pick with Cleveland in 2018 to get Baker, not Josh. This story would have you believe that it was Josh. If it was Josh, then, hey, feather in the cap. But if it was Baker, not so much. For whatever it's worth, Wilson actually confirmed that Seattle thought about trading him in 2018. So both sides seem to be pretty much in unison on this one. And they must just have really, really not wanted to fork over that massive amount of money. I don't think his play warranted the discussion. So that's interesting, right? Because this is where the bad relationship started, it sounds like. Wilson's camp was reportedly very, very unhappy with the fact that the Seahawks were looking at other quarterbacks. They were very, very unhappy that they considered trading him to Cleveland, where Wilson did not want to play, which is why they got the no trade clause. So we've got that. That's interesting. And I'm not going to say either side is the villain there. I'm not going to say either side is necessarily wrong for doing it. Like, certainly it makes sense that Seattle would want to replicate their previous success with a rookie contract quarterback. But on the other hand, I can't deny these first 5 years for Wilson, where you're winning 10 plus games every year, you've got 2 Super Bowl runs, he had one slightly off year because he's playing on one leg, and you're already at 28 years old trying to move off of him. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I buy it, and if I do buy it, then I don't know if I get it. But the only thing I can say is that we must have just seen what contract he was going to want and wanted nothing to do with it no matter how good he was. The next sort of impactful date in this article from Brady describes a game in 2019. So this was after the big extension. Wilson had a great year in 2018. We made the playoffs unexpectedly, and we gave Wilson the money, which, again, if we're assuming the reason why we tried to move Wilson the previous two off seasons was because we wanted to avoid the contract, then I guess when you get to the point where Wilson just had a MVP caliber year and is clearly the driving force behind your team's success, you just kind of have no choice. You have to do it, or your fans are going to revolt. But the next one, and this one's really, I don't know what to say about this one, but short version is Seahawks played the Falcons in 2019. Bad Falcons team. We jumped on them 24-0 at halftime. And then Wilson barely got to throw the ball in the second half. And apparently, Russell Wilson was really, really mad. He wanted to run up the score and pad his stats against a bad Falcons team in a dome so he could push for the MVP race. So I'm going to say this. I just don't buy this. The fact that this story is getting released right before this game against Denver, plus the fact that it's making Wilson out to be such a megalomaniacal jackass, I don't buy it. I really hope it's not true. Because what kind of a quarterback cares about stuff like that? If you're a Wilson hater, then this has to be red meat to you, right? You look at this story and you go, yeah, that's the guy I wanted out of here. That's the prick who needed to get out of here. That's the guy who stopped being a leader and started being all about me, right? Like, you look at this story and you go, wow, this guy's mad because he didn't get to stat pad in the second half of a game that was over. You're mad you didn't get to stat pad against a crappy Falcons team. Like, if he was really mad about that he didn't get to chase the MVP race, chase the MVP award, then, I mean, that's kind of pathetic. But I'm going to say this. I don't buy it. This sounds to me like a bunch of BS. I don't think there are that many players in the NFL that would actually get really, really mad about something like this. And of the quarterbacks who would, I think very, very few of those would voice it. They would keep it to themselves because they know it makes you sound like a giant douche. So I'm hoping this isn't true. And I guess I'll just leave it at that. I'll just say I hope it's not true because I think it paints Wilson in a very negative light. And while I have my issues with him, I don't want to believe he's like that. The article goes on into 2020, a year where Wilson started out super hot. He had 19 touchdowns in 5 games. And Wilson was his brand was getting pushed. Let Russ Cook, which I, of course, supported because it was going so well at that time. And Wilson himself voiced an interest in trying to chase the MVP award. And then the bottom fell out, and Wilson played bad for like a month. He turned the ball over, I think, 10 times in 4 games. We went 1-3. It was ugly. It was bad. And Pete decided, okay, we tried it your way. We're pulling the plug. You're not going to be cooking anymore. And this goes back to something that I've said before. Did I like it when Carroll pulled the plug and turned us into a run-first 1980s team? Not really. I didn't feel like that was going to result in a Super Bowl. We didn't have great running backs. We didn't have a great run-blocking offensive line. I wanted the guys who are supposed to be our best players to be the driving force behind the team. I'd rather die with my boots on. But it doesn't happen if Wilson doesn't turn the ball over 10 times in 4 games. So it's not all one person's fault. And I do accept that even though I didn't like it, if Wilson didn't completely fall off a cliff during that month-long period, then we're not having this conversation because Carroll's got no reason to pull the plug. So it goes both ways. As much as I'm not a big fan of Carroll right now, I think one thing that I've said a few times now, and I think is important to remember, is he's not like the Dean in Animal House. He's not just mad that people are having fun. He doesn't look at Wilson throwing 4 touchdowns a game and think, oh, this is too fun. Our fans are too happy right now. I'm going to ruin it. I want to run the ball 100 times a game because people are having too much fun. That's not what's going on here. He pulled the plug because the results flipped. We went 1-3, turnovers all over the place. The final game of that 4-game stretch, by the way, we couldn't even really move the ball that well. This article actually points to one very specific play against the Rams in the final game of that 4-game stretch where Wilson had the opportunity to run for probably a touchdown, and instead he chucks it into double coverage and it gets picked off in the end zone. And they basically said there were a couple people in the front office that were like, this guy's not trying to win. This guy's trying to win. This guy's not trying to win games. This guy's trying to win MVP. And I don't know if I buy that, but I do buy that his mistakes caused what came next, which was a pretty boring offensive game, a pretty boring offensive game plan the rest of the season. And we won most of our games against a bad schedule, but we ran up against a good team and it blew up. So you can, that stuff makes sense to me. I don't think that Wilson actually threw a fit because he didn't get to chase empty numbers trying to win MVP. I don't buy that. That's something that maybe Aaron Rodgers would do. I don't think Wilson would do that. But I do see this stuff where Wilson feels like he needs to be cooking because of all the success he had in those first 5 games. And then Carroll sees it fall to pieces in the next 4 games and he goes, no, you had your shot. We're going back to playing my kind of football now. So it takes 2 to tango. And then you had the story about the Super Bowl with Wilson in attendance, watching Brady and Mahomes, and then he decides, I'm sick of getting hit so much. I'm going to voice that publicly, which I know this team did not appreciate at all. I know that they really did not like Wilson taking that publicly. They wanted him to keep that in-house if he was going to say it, which I obviously agree with. I think that's very clearly the correct thing to do. You don't want to be airing out your dirty laundry. But it goes on to basically the gist of the rest of the timeline is Wilson wanted the team to build around him. And the implication is that the team kind of felt like he wasn't good enough to build around. That's kind of how I read it. You can read your own interpretation into that. It's not directly said, but that's kind of the vibe that I'm getting. When he was asked about what they were going to do to fix the offensive line, when he asked the team seemed pretty non-committal about it. The offensive linemen that we had at the time were not happy. This article mentions that Dwayne Brown was really, really sick of Wilson at this point. He felt like a lot of the responsibility for getting hit a lot was on him, and he didn't appreciate Wilson tacitly throwing him under the bus, which that's something that I was kind of concerned about when Wilson said it initially. I was like, you might be stuck with this same offensive line this year. That's not going to be a fun conversation in the locker room when you come back to the team in spring. And the article goes on. The team may have considered a trade. Wilson's agent, what's his name? Mark Rogers, gave the list, which we know about, and Carroll basically put his foot down on it and said, no, I don't want to trade him right now. And then we had the bad season. He got hurt. The article mentioned that there are a lot of people in the Seahawks organization who think that he's past his prime. They pointed to the play against the Bears where he took the dumb sack, where old Russell Wilson either doesn't do that or he finds a way to escape the sack, and current Russell Wilson just takes a sack and pushes us to a longer field goal that we missed that probably cost us the game. So they were pointing to that and saying a lot of people look at a play like that and it's emblematic of the fact that he can't do what he used to do, and he's not able to replace what he used to do with something new that can make up for it. So that gets us to where we are with the trade. Carroll eventually was open to the trade. differing philosophies, is the way Doug Baldwin put it. It was just a thing where Wilson feels like he's the greatest. And based off what I see in this article, I kind of see a coach saying, no, you're not. I need to run the ball with you. I need to play good defense. I need you to not take all my money so I can go build a great defense and running game and offensive line. And they couldn't come to an agreement, and here we are. So it's an interesting article. Wilson backs up some of it, although he did go on to say, I don't think my best days are behind me, which that was a big part of the article, right? And it's something that I've said before. I don't believe you trade Wilson unless you think his best days are behind him. So, of course, he's going to say that. That doesn't really mean anything right now. But a lot of interesting things here. The main takeaway I'm getting from this is that we tried to trade Wilson years ago. 5 years ago, we apparently tried to do it, or were open to it. I just find that fascinating because there wasn't anything really wrong with him at that point. It was just he was about to become more expensive. But other interesting things here too. But I'm going to leave you guys with this, and I already talked about this earlier, but I really want to make this very clear. This article dropped less than a week before our game against the Broncos and Russell Wilson. There's got to be a reason for that. This article could have been dropped months ago, weeks ago. It could have been dropped August, July, June, anytime. It gets dropped now. A story which includes mention of Wilson pitching a fit because he didn't get to pad his stats to chase MVP. A story that mentions Wilson throwing his teammates under the bus. A story that mentions Wilson not performing and causing Carroll to have to take the car keys away from him. All these negative things about Wilson, some of which are true, but some of which we can't know. It's not a coincidence. It can't be. And you should definitely treat this article with some degree of skepticism. I believe some of it, maybe I believe a lot of it, but there's some stuff in here that just, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I'm not the biggest fan of Russell Wilson, especially not now that he's not on my team. I have my doubts about what he's going to do going forward, but I don't believe he's the villain that this article would have you believe. I don't think very many quarterbacks or players in the NFL in general are like that. So I don't know. It's an interesting read. I feel like the things that aren't talked about in this article are more interesting than the things that actually got talked about. I didn't see any mention of the closed-door meeting that ended with Wilson apparently being really, really mad before the game against the Cardinals in 2020. The one where he beat the Cardinals, apparently at about the point that Carroll decided he was going to grab a hold of the offense because it wasn't working anymore. I didn't see any mention of that, but it's kind of implied that meeting was the point when Carroll had to step in and say, we can't do this anymore. We're going to play football my way. And Wilson didn't like that. So I'll bet there's some untold stories here that we're going to learn about way down the line, like maybe in a decade from now. But let me know what you guys think. Do you buy all of it? Do you buy none of it? Do you buy some of it? I don't know. Just be cautious. Don't eat the red meat. Don't eat it without examining it. Some of it just doesn't pass the smell test to me. But some of it does. And I guess it goes to show you that there was no scenario where this was going to work out for us. All right. I'll see you guys later. Go Hawks. Probably streaming later tonight. And hope to see you there. Go Hawks.